Yes, indeed. It is time. It is that time. Hello, my friends. It's January 22nd. It is a Monday. I have got a great guest, China expert Dexter Roberts joins me today, and I am hosting the podcast from my childhood bedroom in upstate New York, where I arrived last night after dropping Ava off for her second semester of her freshman year at Ithaca College, and I'm totally fine. Not at all sad, didn't cry at all on my drive to my parents last night. So all is well here as we kick off the week. No, I'm feeling good. I'm really proud of her, and I'm very excited for her. So let's do a show, shall we? There is a lot to talk about, and I'm very happy to have you here. I hope to see you in Las Vegas, March 22nd and 23rd. Get your tickets now. There's more information in the links at the beginning of every show's show notes. So come on out to Vegas. We've got a great lineup of comedians, and John Carroll, who's singing right now, will join us, and so much more. So see you in Vegas, everybody, and let's get to today's news segment. Then my conversation with Dexter Roberts, who's the author of The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, starts at about 24 minutes in. Well, of course, yesterday's big story was sometime around 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, the governor of Florida, who was running for president. He was considered at one point Donald Trump's greatest threat, fell in line and kissed the ring. That's right. Ron DeSantis announced yesterday that he is ending his White House bid and then endorsed the former president. His announcement, made in a video posted on Twitter, came after a disappointing, horrible campaign, and everybody will make fun of him for the rest of history for several things, but mostly because he fell in line with Trump after Donald Trump said so many horrible things about him. He suggested at one point that Ron DeSantis groomed children. He questioned Ron DeSantis' manhood. He called him all kinds of names, from Ron D. Sanctimonious to Meatball Ron. He attacked Ron DeSantis' wife, accused her of attempting to commit organized voter fraud after she invited out-of-state voters to participate in the Iowa caucus. And, of course, she also called him pudding fingers, following reports that the governor of Florida ate pudding with his fingers. But to be fair, that last one is defensible. Nonetheless, this prideless, empty, hollow barrel, terrible person, of course, fell right in line behind Donald Trump and kissed his ass and endorsed him. So there you have it. The script continues to be written the way that we think it will be, at least so far, and hopefully it changes. But we'll talk more about that this week and make fun of Ron DeSantis all weekend, the rest of his life. But the other big stories, let's get through these headlines. I like to read them rapid fire style here at the top, give you as much information as you can to start your day and throughout your week. I think the other really big story yesterday was that hundreds of thousands of people came out in Germany to protest and demonstrate against right-wing extremism. They took to the streets across towns and cities in Germany over the weekend as the country enters a second week of nationwide protests against the right-wing Alternative for Germany party, the AfD party. Demonstrations have gained momentum after reports emerged from investigative news website of a meeting of right-wing extremists at which migration policies, including mass deportations of people of foreign origin, were discussed. Rallies were held in Berlin, Munich, Cologne, as well as in traditional strongholds of this right-wing party in eastern Germany, such as Leipzig and Dresden, with turnout in many places far higher than expected. Organizers in Munich ended the demonstration early due to overcrowding of around 100,000 participants. Protest organizers said 200,000 people attended. And I just think that this is a huge story that I want to learn a lot more about, but a good development to see people out in the streets in Germany protesting, well, Nazis. All right, what else do I have for you? The other big story I thought worth mentioning is that the Palestinian death toll from the war between Israel and Hamas has now soared past 25,000, according to the health ministry in the Gaza Strip. Hard to know how accurate those numbers are, but if it is anywhere close to that, or God forbid more, it is such a horrible, horrible thing. Israel announced the death of yet another hostage yesterday and appeared far from achieving its goals of freeing more than 100 others and crushing the militant group Hamas. NPR says the war's deaths, destruction, and displacement are without precedent in the decades-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The war has divided Israelis, while the offensive threatened to ignite a wider conflict, including Iran-backed groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen that support the Palestinians. And In a related story, a search has ended for Navy SEALs lost at sea on a mission to seize Iranian arms. The incident comes as violent incidents surge across the Middle East and Israelis' war against Hamas. The SEALs disappeared during a dangerous nighttime operation that occurred on January 11th in the Arabian Sea near the coast of Somalia, an area known for piracy and weapons smuggling. So that is terrible, but what else do I have for you? Oh, the weather. I normally don't report on the weather here in the news segment, but more than 90 weather-related deaths have been recorded across our country after many of us were pummeled by these ferocious winter storms the past week. The deaths include at least 25 in Tennessee, 16 in Oregon, remains under a state of emergency following severe ice storms. Tens of thousands of people also remain without power across swaths of the country. Icy conditions expected to ease off in the next few days, but a death toll has been the greatest in Tennessee, Oregon, but fatalities reported in Mississippi, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Washington, Kentucky, Wisconsin, New York, New Jersey, and elsewhere. I hope that you are okay and your family is all right and you're somehow enduring this extreme winter weather. I am actually loving it. I mean, it's cold out, but I enjoy it. I enjoy all the seasons. I bundle up. I'm going skiing with my almost 80-year-old father today, hopefully. So very, very excited about the weather myself. But stay safe out there, folks. Crazy extreme weather this time in January. That's your weather report here on Stand Up. All right, well, I don't have a lot of headlines. There's actually not a tremendous amount of news over the weekend, which I think is great. Usually on Sunday there's a lot more, but I want to play a few things for you, and then we'll get to my interview with Dexter Roberts on China. First of all, of course, obviously, Ron DeSantis dropping out of the presidential election is a pretty big deal, but you got to hear this 1 minute of Ron DeSantis from just 2 weeks ago where he said that Donald Trump thinks you're stupid. Donald Trump doesn't think that you can realize that what he is saying is totally, totally false. Here he is, Ron DeSantis, just 2 weeks ago.
Did this town hall on Fox News when we were doing our debate on CNN, and he said he was asked by a voter who, clearly didn't believe that the lockdowns were the right thing to do, but also understands, look, we all make mistakes. Can you learn from it? And she basically asked him a question, giving him an opportunity to say, oh, yeah, I've learned I wouldn't do that again. And he basically said, oh, I'm a Federalist. I had nothing to do with Fauci. That was all the governors and all this other stuff. And then he blamed me for Fauci. Like, literally, I'm the one that was selling Don't Fauci My Florida t-shirts during this thing. So don't tell me that. So that... it's one thing to try to shade your record, but it's another thing to just try to gaslight people. I mean, when he's saying that to you, he thinks you're stupid. He doesn't think that you can realize that what he's saying is totally, totally false. Ask Governor Reynolds.
Okay, he thinks you're stupid. Who talks that way besides MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman? Anyway, here's the governor of Florida yesterday quitting.
But I can't ask our supporters to volunteer their time and donate their resources if we don't have a clear path to victory. Accordingly, I am today suspending my campaign. I'm proud to have delivered on 100% of my promises, and I will not stop now. It's clear to me that a majority of Republican primary voters want to give Donald Trump another chance. They watch his presidency get stymied by relentless resistance, and they see Democrats using lawfare this day to attack him. Well, I've had disagreements with Donald Trump, such as on the coronavirus pandemic and his elevation of Anthony Fauci. Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear.
Okay, well, that is clear. Trump is superior. Worst guy ever. Terrible, horrible, awful, authoritarian, fascist, racist, rapist. Somehow superior than Joe Biden. But here's more from fake Ron DeSantis.
Hello, my fellow Americans. It turns out that I wanted to talk to you under happier circumstances, but excuse me. It turns out, I know you're talking to the computer mocking me. Shut up and listen. I wanted to speak to you under more favorable circumstances because I think we had a vision and a plan for America to make it free like the free state of Florida where woke goes to die. And it turns out, though, once I hit the campaign trail, people did not like me. My donors were burning through money for no reason, and it seemed like I was going to win absolutely no primaries or caucuses, except maybe the Virgin Islands seemed interested in possibly voting for me. So rather than go through an exercise of futility. I thought, well, now I know that most Republican primary voters probably don't know what futility means because you'd rather vote for syphilis hands Donald Trump. Now, that's okay. I respect the will of the voters, but it's sort of odd. I've accomplished more in Florida than he did as president. I've done equally racist things. And by the way, we're banning the dictionary and transformers in the state of Florida just because it has the word trans in it. So,
Jay Elkovan killing it. And now here is the former disgraced president, about a minute trigger alert. This is real of the former disgraced president, Donald Trump, after news broke that Ron DeSantis had bowed out. Kneel down and kiss the ring.
Before we begin, I'd like to take time to congratulate Ron DeSantis and, of course, a really terrific person who I've gotten to know, his wife Casey, for having run a great campaign for president. He did. He ran a really good campaign, I will tell you. It's not easy. They think it's easy doing this stuff, right? It's not easy. But as you know, he left the campaign trail today at 3 p.m., and in so doing, he was very gracious, and he endorsed me, so I appreciate it. I appreciate that, and I also look forward to working with Ron and everybody else to defeat crooked Joe Biden. We will have to get him out. We have to get him out. He's put our country at great peril. At great peril. So I just want to thank Ron and congratulate him on doing a very good job. It's a tough situation.
It's a tough situation. Well, Ron DeSantis is out, and he has endorsed Trump. Of course, they all will. They are never so against Trump that they can't be for him. So that is our sad reality, that Donald Trump will, in fact, be the Republican nominee. He may be found guilty of serious crimes by the time the election day comes around. He might not. Might be able to drag it out. Might be during the actual convention. We'll see. But here's a little bit more reaction and analysis to Ron DeSantis Trump dropping out, what it means. Of course. Oh, wait, I got to play this for you. This is during that weird debate, which was actually pretty interesting, watching Gavin Newsom. This is a few weeks ago. Gavin Newsom debated Ron DeSantis on Fox News' Hannity and said this.
And I want to answer that very directly. I'll tell you why I'm here. I'm here to tell the truth about the Biden-Harris record and also compare and contrast Ron DeSantis' record and the Republican Party's record as a point of contrast that's as different as daylight and darkness. You want to bring us back to a pre-1960s world, America in reverse. You want to roll back hard-earned national rights on voting rights, on civil rights, on LGBTQ rights, on women's rights, not just access to abortion, but also access to contraception. You want to weaponize grievance. You are focusing on false separateness. You in particular, Ron, are on a banning binge, a cultural purge, intimidating and humiliating people you disagree with. You and President Trump are really trying to light democracy on fire. So, Sean, there are profound differences tonight, and I look forward to engaging them. But there's one thing in closing that we have in common is neither of us will be the nominee for our party in 2024.
There you go. Gavin Newsom killing Ron DeSantis, and that could not have helped his presidential hopes, but so be it. And more from Gavin Newsom in a minute. He was really good on Real Time, destroying Bill Maher on Real Time on HBO on Friday night. But first, let's just stay with the presidential race. And here is Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican senator of South Carolina, and also, of course, from Nikki Haley's state. Here he is endorsing a smiling Donald Trump, standing in front of him at his Trump rally yesterday. And, well, the delivery was real choice. Listen to Tim Scott.
We need a president who understands the American people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Weird.
We need
Donald Trump. All right, there you go. Tim Scott really eating his own you-know-what in that endorsement. Here's some serious analysis from CNN political director David Chalian, who's always good on what went wrong for Ron DeSantis.
David, what do you think? Why do you think this happened so soon?
Well, first of all, presidential campaigns end usually for one main reason, and that is that the money dries up. Yeah. And the money dries up when you are not performing up to expectations. And that is what has happened here with Ron DeSantis. You know, you fall 30 points behind Donald Trump in Iowa after you had you just bet the whole farm on Iowa, right, if you will. And that was a really disappointing, distant second place showing. So he came out of Iowa with no momentum to build in New Hampshire, not a natural electorate for him anyway. And, you know, it's so intriguing. In South Carolina this week, he was answering questions, and he was making the case, Nikki Haley appeals to independents and moderates. You can't really win a nomination race that way. I appeal to conservatives. He said, for instance, I went to all these Iowa caucus sites on Iowa caucus night. And you know what they told me, the Trump voters? They told me they are with me in 2028. Well, you know, that to me indicates that you have this monster of a blockade, if you are Ron DeSantis, and that is Donald Trump. You're appealing to a lot of the same voters and trying to make yourself the Trump alternative, except these are not voters looking for a Trump alternative. They want to double down on Trump, and they were talking to those same kinds of voters. All right, David Chalian on CNN. Now let's head over to MSNBC, where my friend Elie Mystal joined Ayman Mohyeldin to discuss his predictions for the 2024 Republican primaries and make fun of the idea that it was ever even a thing, the Republican primary, not a real thing, as says Elie, and more.
We kind of like pretend that there's a primary for the Republican Party, even though there really isn't one. You know, Haley really is not going to be able to pull a rabbit out of her hat and miraculously is not going to upset Trump. But what is it that you're looking for in this race with these two remaining candidates going into New Hampshire? Is it really just about who loses less?
Yeah, I'm really just interested to see, like, what the level of humiliation it's going to take before these people who have already debased themselves to the MAGA regime, before they drop out and slink back to the rocks that they crawled out under from, right? We talk about this Republican primary as if it's a thing. It's not a thing because the primary challengers didn't try to challenge the frontrunner. Right? It was only in recent days, after he went full normal Republican racist against her, that Nikki Haley decided to have anything to say about the loserdom of Donald Trump. For the most part, Haley, DeSantis, Scott, when he was in it, Hutchinson, to the extent that he exists, they all refused to take on Trump. They were all running in hopes that Jack Smith would take out Trump, right? That Judge Erdogan would take out Trump, that somebody else, some other force, that Trump would get raptured. They were hoping something would take Trump out of the running, and then they would present themselves to the racist, virulent Trump voters as the Trump alternative. Since that didn't happen, since Trump is still allowed to run in these primaries, they have no campaign, and they're seeing the humiliation and debasement of that now as they get worked in these elections against the person they refused to challenge.
All right. Good stuff from Elie Mystal. As always, I'm going to try to get him on this show this week, but I do want to play about 2 minutes from Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO Friday, because I thought the California Governor Gavin Newsom did a great job. I like Gavin Newsom. Some of you don't, maybe. I don't know. What do you think of Gavin Newsom? I thought this was a pretty good 2 minutes on HBO Friday night.
But here's, I feel like the last couple of years you've like purposely picked this fight with the red states. I mean, the DeSantis. But I don't want to live in the Civil War country.
I agree with that.
You know what? Well, but you seem like you purposely want to set up this dichotomy between, this is a blue state and that's a red state. Yeah. And I don't want to live in that country. I like Florida.
I'm with you. And by the way, I like Florida as well. I like all these states. I completely agree. I don't want to have a state of mind that's a constant fight or flight. We've gone through so much. We've been polarized and traumatized. There's been a tough 5-6 years across the globe, not just in this country. That said, I'm not going to sit back and watch. You made the point just a moment ago in your monologue. You got folks out there trying to bring us back to a pre-1960s world. America in reverse, rolling back voting rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, not just access to abortion, but contraception. I mean, it's a profound and consequential moment. And you could sit by and say, well, I really want to get along, as these guys are rolling back the clock, or you can stand tall and assert yourself. And the reason I started to go into those red states, the reason I started to take on DeSantis, and the reason I started doing ads in these red states is I didn't feel my party was doing enough. It was CRT one year, and then it's ESG, and it's DEI, anything with 3 letters. These guys keep coming, and they're shape-shifting. And they're charming. And so, but it's true, right? And I just thought there was a little timidity in our party. And I thought we needed to call this stuff out. These guys are being on a banning binge across this country. You want to talk about cancel culture? Look at the Republican Party. Ask Bud Light, Target, Disney. That's just the private sector. Banning speech, not just in the classroom, but in the boardroom as it relates to issues of race. Look what they've done. 3,362 books just last year they're banning. This is a serious and consequential moment. It's the cultural purge that's going on in this country. And so I just felt like we needed to call that out as Democrats and put them on the defensive, since we're consistently on our heels as a Democratic Party, even though I think the facts bear out our case significantly better than the case on the other side.
All right, buddy. Gavin Newsom on HBO's Real Time on Friday night. I thought it was real good. I think he's real good, certainly in debate, much less in an interview. You're not going to beat him. At least that's my opinion. And finally, let me get you some comedy here. Let's get some laughs. The Saturday Night Live was live this past weekend, and I always love the weekend update with Michael Che and Colin Jost. Here's a little of that.
And if you're feeling confused, you're not the only one. At a rally on Thursday, President Biden said he was mixed up when he claimed he had just taken a photo with a woman who wasn't even there. Then the next day, Donald Trump repeatedly confused Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. Guys, I don't know if we should do this election. It's honestly starting to feel like elder abuse. I don't even blame them. I blame us for allowing it. It reminds me of those bum fight videos where they made 2 homeless guys fight for money. And now we look back on it and we're like, how did we as a society let that happen? So I think the best solution is we should just tell Trump and Biden that they both won. And that we're very proud of them. And that they can rest now.
In Monday's Iowa caucuses, Ron DeSantis beat out Nikki Haley for second place. Well, that ought to put whatever this is on his face. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who looks like someone drew Ving Rhames with their eyes closed, endorsed Donald Trump. But remember, most Trump supporters only count him as 3/5 of an endorsement. Oh, boy.
Donald Trump urged his supporters to brave the sub-zero temperatures in Iowa to vote for him, saying, even if you vote and then pass away, it's worth it. Voting for Trump and then passing away is also what happened with COVID. After Trump was photographed with some strange red marks on his hand, some dermatologists speculated it could be something called hand herpes. What the hell is hand herpes? Said Tim Scott.
Shaking hands.
John Kerry announced that he is stepping down as the U.S. climate envoy and is expected to focus on President Biden's re-election campaign. And it's not a great sign that Biden's campaign is a bigger emergency than climate change. In an interview on Fox News, presidential candidate Nikki Haley said that America has, quote, never been a racist country. Because if Americans were so racist, why did they have sex with their slaves?
Oh, dear.
I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight. I really am.
Pope Francis called for a ban on surrogate motherhood, which he says violates the dignity of the woman and the child. Plus, the Catholic Church doesn't want extra kids around while they're trying to quit.
Good stuff from the boys at Saturday Night Live and their writers. And now it's time to get to my guest. How about it? Last week, Dan Maniscalco, longtime listener, said, hey, can you have somebody on to talk about China? I'm paying attention to these Taiwanese elections, and it's really interesting and important. So I do what you tell me to do. I was curious as well, so I reached out to our friend Dexter Tiff Roberts, who was referred to me by the great Pete Coe because he's his brother-in-law. Well, Dexter is an expert on China. He actually lived in China for 2 decades, speaks Mandarin Chinese. He's an award-winning writer and speaker, serves as a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative. He's an adjunct instructor at the University of Montana, where he now lives, a regular commentator on U.S. China trade and political relationships, and formerly the bureau chief, China bureau chief at Asian news editor at Bloomberg Newsweek. So I'm very excited to have him joining me to answer all my questions. You got to get his new book. It's fascinating. The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, the Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World. Lots of questions for Dexter Roberts, and I hope that you appreciate this conversation, like it, something a little bit different, but I learned a lot, and I want to learn a lot this week, as I do every day here on the program, from the best experts I can find. Let me know who you want me to have on, and I'll reach out to them, and hopefully they'll join me here on this daily podcast. Today, it's Dexter Tiff Roberts, and I'm very excited to have him back. Let's do it! All right, there he is, Dexter Roberts. Welcome back. Are you in beautiful Montana?
I am, and beautiful and very cold Montana is where I am right now.
What a wonderful place, though, to live. And though it's the dead of winter, what's that like? I saw your pictures on Twitter. They're absolutely, you took those photos, absolutely gorgeous. We have a big thing with nature photography here, this community. I love it.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's the thing about where I live in western Montana. You just turn and point and shoot, and everything looks beautiful. So I'm a beneficiary of that. I can't pretend it has anything to do with photography skills. It's so beautiful here.
When you lived in China for 20 years, you live in Montana now. Where else have you lived in your life?
I lived in the Bay Area when I was in college at Stanford. I lived in New York City, again, for university, when I was doing a grad degree at Columbia. And then I also lived in Tibet, the part of the region, part of the world we're going to be talking about, and in Hong Kong as well.
Taipei is the big city, the capital of Taiwan.
That's right.
Got that cool building. Is it the Tom Cruise building? Is that how I know it?
Yes, I think. Well,
I'm sorry. I just probably hundreds of architects and the entire Taiwanese people by calling it the Tom Cruise building, but that's how I saw it the first time in a Mission Impossible.
Yeah, I think that's the one. Taipei 101 is the beautiful 101 stories. Yeah.
So that's interesting that you've lived in all those places, and it's a fascinating life, especially, as you lived in China for 2 decades, reporting from there. And I want to talk about all of that, and just always love to get to know people and where they've been and what they're doing. But this election in Taiwan, obviously I want to talk about it and why it matters. But first, I just wanted to start with the current relationship between the U.S. and China. The Chinese president came here last year in the fall, I think, and it was an interesting meeting between Xi Jinping and President Biden. And they seem like they're playing nice-ish, and they've returned to some kind of, quote, normal-ish. And those are the foreign policy expertise language that I use. What is the current relationship like? How would you describe it?
I would describe it as a relationship that is riven with real challenges and disagreements, but one that, as you point out, both sides over the last 6 months or even the last year have been working hard to try to improve. I think aware that the stakes of having a really bad U.S. China relationship are so high, not just for the two countries, but for the whole world. So that visit by Xi Jinping to San Francisco, where he met President Joe Biden on the sidelines of the APEC, or the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, that was a key moment. And since then, relations have continued to be relatively good, given those challenges, though.
There's been no spy balloons flying over, and we haven't sent the Speaker of the House to Taiwan. There's things that we do to each other, these two countries, that they could be, I don't know how you would describe them, dangerous, damaging, unhelpful, a warning, a signal. And it seems right now that there haven't been too many of those over the past couple of months, at least. And I guess that's a good sign, right?
Yeah, I think both sides, Beijing and Washington, are trying to avoid these flare-ups. I mean, the spy balloon was a big one. And of course, that floated over Montana. That's where that was where it was first spotted. So people here really paid attention, to say the least. But that was right before Secretary of State Blinken was supposed to go to Beijing, and the visit had to be delayed. Since then, he's been there, a whole series of cabinet secretaries, Treasury Secretary Yellen, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, Clement Zonkeri, all of them visited. And that was all in preparation for this eventual visit, the meeting, rather, between between Xi and Biden in San Francisco.
How would you describe the current state of the Chinese economy? I know that's a giant question, but you write about it on your Substack, and I just think it's a fascinating thing to pay attention to our own economy as objectively and dispassionately as we can, and then with as much moral clarity and judgment as possible as well. Don't get me wrong. But how would you describe, because you've been writing a lot about it, and I just, as I think about the relationship between our two countries and how we've described each other as competitors, there's enough room for both of us was the kind of language I heard coming out of that summit. But what is their economy like right now?
Well, first of all, it matters a lot to us, obviously. And most of our big multinationals are deeply invested in China, either as a market or as a part of the global supply chain. And of course, we have one of the world's largest trading relationships and big investors in each other's countries. So it matters a lot. Their economy is not in a good spot now at all. There was hope that after they lifted these pretty extreme measures they put in place with quarantines and basically shutting down the economy and business and society during the worst of COVID, that the economy would really bounce back, and particularly that the Chinese consumers would start spending a lot of money again, and that would be good for China and good for the world. Well, that really did not happen. There was a little blip up in growth and the economy looking good in the first quarter of 2023. Since then, it's been really gloomy. So they're facing that reality, and they have these big structural issues. It's not just a cyclical issue, as the economists say. Yeah. It's structural. They have an aging population and an aging workforce, which is a big problem. They have deep inequality, which hurts consumption in the economy, as I've written about a lot. Yeah. And also they have a huge problem with this excessive reliance on debt or borrowing to drive economic growth.
All three of those are major, important to unpack. And you talk about they're all structural. And I guess I just want to ask for people that don't understand it like me. I thought theirs was a command and control economy. The central government was in charge and in control of things. And the attractive part of that is that you can get a lot more right. You don't have to fight and compromise and have special interests, and you just go and you can make a widget. You can increase that. You can decrease this. You can force people to have this many kids or not. And yet it seems like there's a lot of structural issues with that command and control economy. How does it really work to some extent? How responsible is the central government for the economic issues that are, as you just said, structural and really long-term don't look great for the country?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there was a time when the more command economy did work, when they hadn't loaded on quite as much debt as they have now, and actually being able to tell local governments, local companies to open the spending spigots and spend more money was a good thing. But that's really been driven to a large extent by debt in recent years, for quite a few years, almost a decade, and it's gotten worse. And now what they really need to do is to have, and they've said this, they're aware of this, they need to get the Chinese people to spend more. They need a more domestic, what they call a domestic or household consumption driven economy. And that's not something you can really order with a command economy. So that's a big challenge for them. The other thing I'd note is they were moving away from a command economy for years now. I mean, actually going back to 1979 with Deng Xiaoping, the former economic lead, reform and opening policy, what it's usually called. And so they were actually increasingly reliant on the private sector, on private companies, both as job creators, tax revenue generators, innovators. And what we've seen in more recent years, particularly under the present leader, Xi Jinping, is a step back towards a more command economy. And that's just not what they need right now. It's scared the private sector. We've seen there's sort of a dual confidence crisis in China right now. On the one hand, those household consumers or regular folks who don't want to open their wallets and spend. On the other hand, on the other side, or not on the other side, but also the private sector, private companies that are not investing or putting money into, building new factories or whatever they do to expand their business.
It does not sound good. It doesn't sound good at all. And I want to ask you, though, of course, about the election in Taiwan. But one more just question, and, as reference to your work in your book, I think one of the things that you have been given a lot of credibility as a journalist for his following his family in China for a very long time. I think it was like 20 years that you covered what had happened in their life in the community. And I wanted to ask you just a specific question about, as you mentioned, poverty. What is it like there and your reporting and what you saw and lived with and around versus how we understand poverty in America? And obviously it can take many different shapes and forms, rural and urban and all kinds of different ways to describe it. But what is it a fair question? Because I'm really interested in the differences of like the middle class, the upper class, the middle upper class, and certainly as the economic conditions worsen for families and communities, those living in poverty in China. What's it like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you say, I mean, there's vast differences actually, even amongst people that are living in very low income or poverty in China. You've got urban poverty, you've got rural poverty. I think it's similar to what you might see in a country like the United States in terms of the fact that it's very diverse, unfortunately, and a lot of people are affected. But I think what's notable in China is the fact that one of them, and I've argued this in my book and elsewhere, one of the primary causes of poverty or of keeping a large proportion of the people sort of stuck in second-class status, low income, not having enough money, is actual policies that were put in place by the Chinese Communist Party many years ago, actually, during the Mao Zedong era, back, more than 50, over half a decade ago, and they're still in place today. And I write about this. So there's in effect a internal passport system in China, which is called the household registration system or the hukou system. It's a little complicated, but where it matters is it ties everyone's social welfare benefits, whether it's healthcare, education for their children, or their pensions, to the place where they or their parents were born. And so there's about half of China is still officially classified and from rural parts of the country. And I say officially classified because they have this hukou, it was the Chinese name or the English name, household registration, that puts them in the countryside. That means that their social welfare, again, the education, pension, healthcare, education for their children, is tied to where they come from. And that's where you get the real inequality there, because China has huge disparities between what the social welfare benefits look like in the countryside and in the city. One last thing I just say, a lot of those rural people have become internal migrants. They've moved to work in factories or on construction sites or increasingly in restaurants or driving motorcycles as delivery drivers in the cities, but they still are tied because of that policy to the countryside, and their social welfare and their income is held back because of that policy.
Oh, it's fascinating and really important to understand and learn more in the book, of course, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, the Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World. Major election in Taiwan, obviously a lot at stake. And before I talk to you today, I just tried to learn a quick Taiwan history 101, and it's important, obviously, always ever present, because apparently it goes pretty far back. We're talking the Ming Dynasty in the 1600s, and then, of course, more recently, Nixon's normalization with China. And now it seems like Taiwan has almost no friends left, official friends, diplomatic relationships with, and everybody is scared of China. And it's a very complicated relationship to try to understand. Where would you start with the American listener viewer on why this election and relationship is so important to us, much less them?
Well, I mean, Taiwan it just had a free and fair democratic election. People participated. That's something that, at least, according to our values, we're supposed to care about. So we should care about. It also has
to some people, but yeah.
We won't talk about our own democratic failings in this call. But anyway, they've done something very impressive there. They've had a free and fair election. By the way, the losers conceded graciously. Not something we've seen. They did.
Yeah.
And they have, it's the most vibrant civil society in Asia. You've got, gay marriage is legal there. I think it's the only place in Asia it's legal. You have all kinds of, vibrant civil society across the spectrum. And so these are very important things. It also happens to be economically really important. As you know, I mean, as people like to say, the little semiconductor chips that go into everything from our iPhone to our iPhones to our vehicles to like advanced ballistic missile systems. People call them the new gold. I'm sorry, the new gold, the new oil. So there's a Taiwan happens to be the global player in creating advanced semiconductor chips. We need them. China needs them. Everyone needs them. And Taiwan's got them. And so this is a very big issue economically and why we all have to care about Taiwan as well. You know, to paint the picture of the election that just happened, we have the candidate. He was the vice president of what's called the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. He's now going to be the president. His name's Lai Ching-te, and he is really, you could call him the nemesis of Beijing. They really don't like the Democratic Progressive Party. They accuse them of wanting full independence. I don't think that's really fair. It's been made clear repeatedly by the Democratic Progressive Party of the DPP, as well as by the Taiwan people, that what they want is the status quo.
Right.
They're not going to push for independence because China said that's a red line and it could lead to an invasion. So they don't want to push for that, but they also don't want to have a much closer relationship, certainly not politically, with mainland China. They saw what happened to Hong Kong, and that sort of scared them.
What happened in Hong Kong?
Well, Hong Kong, China back in 1997 signed an agreement with Great Britain, which was then a British colony, saying that they would give them a high degree of autonomy until, I believe, 2047 was supposed to be, for 50 years. I think that was the date, if I got that right. Anyway, around then. And what we've seen over the last few years is the steady dissolution or destruction of any sense of real autonomy in Hong Kong. It's becoming more and more, in effect, just something equivalent to another province of China's. So they broke that promise. China, I'll just finish on that topic quickly, but China also promised that they would do something called one country, two systems. Right. One country being the People's Republic of China, but Hong Kong gets a separate system. And for a long time, they've told Taiwan, everything's going to be fine. We're going to give you what we gave Hong Kong, one country, but you'll have your own separate system, two systems. Well, they don't seem to be two systems in Hong Kong anymore. It seems to be one country, one system. And Taiwan is not interested in that.
Right. That's right. They've got that to see whether or not China's good on its word and what could happen to them. And the world is watching as well. Why? Is it just because of the semiconductor issue and how much that would disrupt the world economy again, as we saw and learned all about it during the pandemic? Is it because we're really concerned about actual war? I mean, how is the world so focused on this election, it seems, and this small little country of 20-some million people?
Yeah, I think about 23 million. Well, I mean, first of all, that's 23 million people. I started my post-U.S. Asia life in Taiwan. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah, it looks absolutely beautiful.
I didn't make friends with all 23 million people, but I have a lot of good friends from there. And so that's a significant number of people. And again, as I said, a real democracy, a vibrant civil society. So I think it matters, obviously, just on a sort of a human rights, a human value perspective. I think there's also a concern that it's become something of a symbol for the possibility of a more democratic Asia or more democratic China version of China. Although the Taiwanese, view themselves increasingly as Taiwanese, young people in particular, rather than Chinese. There's obviously deep, deep ties between mainland China and Taiwan. And so Taiwan's very existence is sort of sends a message to China and the world that China sometimes likes to suggest that their system is not conducive towards sort of a democratic system or sort of something closer to what's often called a Western democratic system. Taiwan sort of puts the lie to that, that it doesn't work with Chinese people. And I think that really deeply disturbs Beijing from the Western perspective. It's sort of it's a thorn in the side of China. And it is proof that indeed China could have a different system, I would say. It doesn't have to be the much more authoritarian system that they have put in place and that they are increasingly strengthening now. So I think it matters for all those reasons, even beyond just the economic reasons we talked about earlier.
Yeah, no, that's really obviously very, very important. And I'm glad that that's, the way that you see it, that it's not something more symbolic or something more in terms of economic interest specifically. And it sounds like, and I've been preparing to talk to you about it. It sounds like a beautiful place to go and visit for sure as well. But the election here was, one party was closer to China. The other party was closer to, as you said, I think the status quo here. What's being sold during this election? What was the campaign? What are the kind of issues and interests of the Taiwanese people that they were going to vote in? And by the way, I think that the turnout is much higher in Taiwan than it is in many countries that have democratic elections, right?
Yeah, no, I think the turnout was good. And there were sort of the bread and butter issues that you would see in an election like in the U.S., like the state of the economy, declining wages was an issue, high housing prices was an issue as well.
Yeah.
But so many of those things, and those very much, of course, they matter to the Taiwanese people like they matter to people everywhere. And they were very much front and center in the election. At the same time, it's impossible for them to avoid their massive neighbor, 1.4 billion people in the People's Republic of China across a pretty narrow Taiwan Strait, which, by the way, has been repeatedly threatening Taiwan for years now.
Right.
Was sending
That's
over
be scary.
PLA flights, sending balloons over Taiwan as well recently, not just over here. So I think that was sort of the big, gorilla in the room, or if you will, was China. So each party also had to run on how they would deal with China. So you had, as you said, the DPP really talking status quo. They did need to reassure to a degree the Taiwanese people that they were not pro-independence, because some statements that the future president made had suggested to some people that he did want to change the status quo. Again, as I said earlier, Taiwanese don't want that. They know that changing the status quo is very, very dangerous. The response from China could be dramatically scary. And then you had parties like the KMT, which is, been around forever. They're the ones who fled after they lost the civil war to the communists back in the 40s and moved to Taiwan because they lost.
Is that Chiang Kai-shek? Chiang
Kai-shek.
Chiang Kai-shek. Yes. I remember that name from grammar school. Then I saw it again in my prep today, and I was like, that's a fascinating story. He was exiled to Taiwan, and then.
Yeah, so he set up on Taiwan in the 40s, and they created Taiwan back then. It used to be authoritarian, by the way, but then it democratized. But anyway, the KMT today has the reputation of being too close to China. They've been big proponents of a stronger business relationship, also a stronger political relationship. So during this election, they sort of stepped back and said, "Oh no, we're not as pro-China, or we don't want to get as close to China as everyone says," because that's a losing proposition amongst the Taiwanese voters. And then there was a third opposition party, which basically said the DPP and the KMT have had their chance and they both screwed up, and now it's our chance. But they didn't get they got some significant votes. One of the things that happened out of all this is the legislature, the parliament, which is called the Legislative Yuan. No one the DPP lost its majority. So policy making is going to be a lot.
So it's like the American president without the control of Congress. So the leader is one party and the Congress is another party. So they can't actually get much policy done, much like our country most of the time.
Absolutely. No, there's an expectation. People are predicting that it's going to be not a lot of action on domestic policy over the next 4 years.
Let me just ask you how closely you follow, or if you talk to your friends there, the actual campaign, how it plays out in media there. What does it look like? Is it similar to what we see? And I would imagine that China has all kinds of covert and overt influence in advertising and messaging. I don't know. I mean, what are the people that are going to vote in this vibrant democratic economy? What do they see? What are the messages they get? Do they have a Tucker Carlson there, et cetera?
I don't know if they have a Tucker Carlson. I sure hope not.
Like some real asshole that just dominates people's minds.
So I don't think they have that really, but to your point about China's influence, China has been very aggressive in pushing disinformation, about what's happening in Taiwan, and very clever about trying to influence elections. They do things like, and this is popular, they'll do all expense paid trips for Taiwanese politicians to come to the mainland. And they'll often, many of them will accept that. And they also, as I said, they try to play games in the media as well. There are a lot of Taiwanese businessmen that are quite beholden economically. Their businesses are very dependent on mainland China, and including in one example, the owner of a big Taiwanese media company, which has been accused in the past of being too pro-China. On the disinformation side, I'll also say quickly, they've used all different kinds of methods of disinformation to basically push a couple ideas. One, that Taiwan democracy doesn't work, so you might as well give up and not go to the polls. Another big thing they've pushed is if it comes down to a military conflict, the U.S. will not step forward. And so these are ideas, or disinformation as we call it, that they've tried to put into the public sphere in Taiwan, and they have to try to affect the election.
It's scary for them, for those people. Most of the, what is the culture? Their whole lives, they're kind of sitting next to a potential invasion. I mean, is that a threat? Is it ever present? I mean,
I think so. Interestingly, from what I hear from friends and others is, like everywhere, life goes on. So people aren't thinking about this on a daily basis. When there's, when China decides it's time to send a whole bunch of its PLA jets over the Taiwan Strait or around the island, then actually people start to pay more attention. But, as we mentioned earlier, sort of the bread and butter issues also were big campaign issues. I think people, like everywhere, want to get on with their lives. So they've found ways, I think, my understanding, to sort of deal with it, even though they do have this real threat right next door.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I just do have to ask you, as we're underway here with another presidential election, does China have an interest in the outcome of it? Obviously, they have an interest in the outcome of the election. I could probably argue it either way. I think the Chinese have always been concerned about Donald Trump because of the uncertainty that he is. He's a madman, and people, world leaders, actually do like certainty to a certain extent. So there is that. But what is their interest, do you think? And will they be involved in interfering in our elections in any way, the way they have been in Taiwan and other places? And I think here, to a certain extent in the past, obviously we didn't talk about it today, but there are always all kinds of corporate espionage. You've written about that recently at your Substack. But what about their interests in our election? Will they interfere, Tiff?
Well, I think absolutely they're going to try, and they've done it before. I don't think they've gotten up to the, last I checked, up to the level of Russia in sophistication. But there is an army of bots and fake accounts across Twitter, Facebook. We've got TikTok, which has been a big concern because the parent company is owned by China. Right. And so absolutely, I think they'll do their best to try to interfere. I think their top goal is to, like Russia, sow dissension, encourage the already existing divisions within the United States, like they did in Taiwan, try to convince people that our democratic system is broken. And by the way, they have that you mentioned Trump and chaos. I should mention that incidents, horrendous things like we experienced, like January 6th, are things that are, in effect, can be seized upon, and they have been seized upon by the Chinese propaganda apparatus as evidence of how broken our system is. So, for example, when January 6th happened, it was top of the news in China. They said, look, American democracy is a disaster. And by the way, they didn't have to work very hard to show that that's what it looked like.
It sounds like accurate reporting.
Yeah. So they like chaos. They like American relationships overseas to be tattered. By the way, our former president, Trump, one of the things he did is, create a lot of concern across Europe, across Asian partners like South Korea, Japan. And those sorts of things, I think, are ultimately can be turned to China's advantage. If they feel like the U.S. is at odds with a lot of its traditional partners and allies, that's good for China. They watched what happened, as an aside, they watched what happened after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and these concerted economic sanctions on Russia that the U.S. helped pull together, and the EU. And this really concerns them. So they don't want unity. They want chaos. And so be interesting to see if they go for a particular candidate who might be more chaos provoking than our other candidates.
I know this is a stupid question to a certain extent, but why do they want chaos? Don't they want a certain certainty with our economy so we can buy all the stuff that they're selling us, that they're producing? Aren't our economies so intertwined that the chaos is bad for both of us?
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a good point. It's not really, there's no easy solution. So you're absolutely right. They didn't like through hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs that were put upon them by Trump at all. They didn't like that. On the other hand, I think they saw America's global standing eroded, I would argue, during those years. And that's something that they see as probably a net positive for China. So there's good and there's bad, I think, for them in different, regardless of where the U.S. goes, there can be good parts and bad parts to it, but they'll do their best to try to seize upon things, for example, like I said, chaos, to try to make that work to their advantage.
Man, it's awesome talking to you. I really appreciate your expertise and credibility joining us here. It's such an important issue and really fascinating. Hey, what happened? I don't know what happened to the recording. Got cut off as I was saying goodbye to Dexter Roberts. You bumblebees here at the end got really punished. I apologize. You've been robbed, and I need to make it up to you. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Dexter Roberts. That was an amazing conversation. I learned a lot, and I am very grateful to have experts like Dexter Roberts on the show. I can't do it without your support, though, so thank you very much. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. If you haven't yet, do it now and write a review of the podcast. Subscribe on YouTube, where you can watch many of my favorite interviews. Stand Up with Pete on TikTok and all of the rest. That's all I've got for you today from my childhood bedroom in upstate New York. I will have more. Not taking any time off this week. I'm going to be with you each and every day. Looking forward to talking with you on Thursday night at our hangout and anytime in between. Get your tickets for Vegas. That's all I've got for you. John Carroll, I'll shut up so you can sing us out.
Stand up, you gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up